Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
We've had a rise in hate crimes every single one of the last 3 years. During an administration where you have a president who's called Mexicans rapists and criminals, though Mexican immigrants commit crimes at a far lower rate than those born here in the country, he has tried to make us afraid of them to some real effect and consequence. Attempting to ban all Muslims from this country. The day that he signed that executive order, the mosque in Victoria, Texas was burned to the ground. Those chants that we heard in Greenville, North Carolina, send her back, talking about our fellow American citizens duly elected to represent their constituents in the Congress who happen to be women of color. He is a racist, and he stokes racism in this country, and it does not just offend our sensibilities, it fundamentally changes the character of this country, and it leads to violence.
And there you have it, Beto O'Rourke, a week ago yesterday, speaking in El Paso. Welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. I want to use Beto O'Rourke as a jumping off point to talk about, to some degree, not in depth, I'll do that maybe later in the podcast or tomorrow, to talk a little bit about red flag laws. Because, as you know, Beto O'Rourke, calling the president a racist and drawing a causal link between his rhetoric, which of course he takes out of context. He doesn't let people understand the context in which the president made some of those statements, using Charlottesville, using his speech about Mexico sends immigrants here, some of whom are rapists and murderers, which of course is true. Beto O'Rourke personifies the utterly deranged viewpoint that most presidential candidates, in fact, I guess I'd have to say with the exception of maybe one or two, they've all gone off this deep end. Well, I want to go back to when Beto O'Rourke was 15 years old, the same Robert Francis O'Rourke. The story was first told by Reuters. Reuters wrote, while a teenager, O'Rourke belonged to the oldest group of computer hackers in U.S. history. The hugely influential Cult of the Dead Cow, jokingly named after an abandoned Texas slaughterhouse, is notorious for releasing tools that allowed ordinary people to hack computers running Microsoft Windows. It's also known for inventing the word hacktivism to describe human rights-driven security work. Members of the group, according to Reuters, have protected O'Rourke's secret for decades, reluctant to compromise his political viability. Now, in a series of interviews, Cult of the Dead Cow members have acknowledged that O'Rourke is one of their own. It was when O'Rourke was a member of this group that he used a pen name, a pseudonym, Psychedelic Warlord, to write a short story that was called, quote, Visions from the Last Crusade. The story is only 435 words. I'm tempted to read all of it, but here are a couple of choice representative excerpts. Robert Francis O'Rourke wrote in Visions from the Last Crusade, my one and only goal in life became the termination of everything that was free and loving. This feeling pervaded everything in my life. Yet the first few months after realizing my goal, I had done nothing. Then one day as I was driving home from work, I noticed two children crossing the street. They were happy to be free from their troubles. I knew, however, that this happiness and sense of freedom were much too overwhelming for them. This happiness, O'Rourke wrote, was mine by right. Let me pause for a moment. At age 15, Beto O'Rourke wrote that the happiness that he saw in those children, those two children crossing the street, he says that happiness was mine by right. He goes on to write, I had earned it in my dreams. As I neared the young ones, I put all my weight on my right foot, keeping the accelerator pedal on the floor until I heard the crashing of the two children on the hood, and then the sharp cry of pain from one of the two. I was so fascinated for a moment that when, after I had stopped my vehicle, I just sat in a daze, sweet visions filling my head. The more people I killed, he wrote, the longer my dreams were. I soon quit my job and stayed at my house in an almost comatose state. Now, at the end of that story, O'Rourke fixed this note. Copyright 1988 CDC Communications by Psychedelic Warlord 82888-73. All rights, of course, are S-word in their worth. Now this same guy wants to be your president. But let's go back to when he's 15 years old. Now, obviously, he didn't do any of those things. Obviously, Beto O'Rourke never put his foot to the accelerator, smashed into two children crossing the crosswalk. He never had two children smashed through his windshield. But he did write about how their happiness was his and how he dreamed of killing them in that moment. If, just by perchance, we had had a red flag law and someone had read that, would Beto O'Rourke now have a juvenile record? Regardless of whether or not that juvenile record would be free for us to see, it would probably be sealed, and unless one of these former members of the cult of, the cult of the dead cow, unless one of them had talked about, Beto had, or Robert Francis, I don't know what he was called Beto at the time, Robert Francis had written this story, and somehow his parents read it, or a friend read it, and a friend told a friend told a friend, and the next thing you know, the cops are knocking at the door because they want to sit down and talk to him. They want to take him in because they think he might be at a point where he's going to harm himself or others. And I don't know whether there were any guns in the home or not. I don't know whether at age 15 Beto O'Rourke owned any guns himself or not. But I use this as an example of exactly how a red flag law can destroy due process. Exactly how a red flag law can be used in, obviously, looking back now, I don't know how old Robert Francis O'Rourke is now, but, let's say he's 50. So 35 years have passed since he wrote that at age 15. He's done nothing like that other than just turn into a dumbass Democrat. He's really done nothing that would warrant, if at the time a red flag law had been in effect, or someone had decided that that was an indication that he was going to harm himself or others, that he should have been taken into detention, into a facility, and subjected to some sort of court review about whether or not he was a nut job. Now, of course, we know he's a nut job, but he's a nut job for a whole host of other reasons, not because he dreamed about killing kids in a crosswalk. You get my point. Red flag laws are dangerous to this country. So I want to talk about why I believe that red flag laws are dangerous to this country. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who is a freshman Congress from one of the Houston area districts, a former Navy SEAL. You may recall Dan Crenshaw is the congressman who wears the black patch over his right eye. I have a lot of admiration for Dan Crenshaw. He has taken on the establishment. He has done a lot of wonderful things in terms of going to Congress and standing up for what he believes in. And in this case, he has posted a video to Twitter in which he says, it's clear that there has been some confusion about what conservatives would support when it comes to laws that try to better protect our communities. Let's address this directly. And he says this.
Wow, what a week. So earlier this week, President Trump indicated his support for something called red flag laws. I stated on Twitter that maybe we should consider them at the state level. Maybe we should have a conversation about it, and it should be a conversation. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. What came out of it instead was hate-filled comments, lots of emotion, a lot of anger, a lot of memes. A lot of memes, by the way, which could be improved. Okay, but that's not the point. The point is that clearly even the words red flag law just emotionally triggered a lot of people. It made you guys really mad.
He admits that just the use of the term red flag law, and then of course he uses the vernacular of today, triggered many of you, and it shut down the conversation. Then why are you using the term red flag law? If you know, or you now understand, that that law is loaded with emotion, that is a term of art that has been completely co-opted by the left to mean one thing. So if you're going to go out and talk about red flag laws, and I freely admit I'm one of those individuals, the minute you say that you support red flag laws, I don't quit listening. But I certainly go on the defensive. I'll hear you out, but I'm ready to chew you up and spit you out because you are probably, I'm not saying you, but other people, you are probably naively supporting something that, one, you don't fully understand, and two, if you understood what it means to those on the left, even understanding what it means to them today, and then understanding, I talked just last night, talking about another situation that I'm involved in regarding something totally unrelated to red flag laws. But I pointed out that what drives me crazy about this organization that I'm dealing with, they can't see 2 or 3 steps beyond a particular decision. And I think sometimes we think red flag laws mean what it means today without fully understanding what it means as a government program, whether it be at the federal, state, or local level, as that program begins to morph and grow and metastasize like a cancer. Because those of you who've listened to me for any time at all on the radio know that I have pointed out that is a fundamental truth about government programs. That they metastasize, they grow and they get larger, and pretty soon they're way beyond what their original intention was. That same absolute truth about government programs applies to red flag laws, whether you want to admit it or not. Dan Crenshaw continues.
And it seemed that no amount of explanation was able to quell your fears or convince you otherwise, and convince you that somehow the president and I had not betrayed you. That is not true, of course, and it's sad that many of you think that.
Well, it's sad that we think that, Congressman, because we have learned over the years that when you adopt the language of the left, when you start using their language, and that's your starting point, that's your starting point for something that you want to accomplish, then the natural assumption is you're starting at the wrong position. It goes back to my ruler story, the Peggy Noonan ruler. If the political spectrum is a 12-inch ruler and the middle is 6 inches, the left has dragged the political center of this country, I used to say at 4 inches, but you look at the current crop of Democrat candidates, and I would say we're probably at a 3 or a 2. So when you adopt their language, you're starting from that 2 or 3 inch position, which is far left to the center of the political spectrum. So you need to come up with new language.
Yes. But I did have some good conversations, some good private conversations with a lot of you, and this is what I found out. Clearly, when we say red flag laws, you guys stop listening. You can't hear what we're suggesting. Because understandably, you automatically assume that we are just agreeing with the left's version of that law. And we all know that the left's version would not be good. It would not protect due process. But as it turns out, that isn't what we're talking about at all. At its heart, what we're talking about is the ability to confiscate weapons when there is clear evidence that violence is about to be committed.
Clear evidence that we can confiscate weapons when there is clear evidence that a crime is about to be committed. There is and I forget what this mathematical formula is. I should look it up. I keep using it all the time. But there's this mathematical formula, this thesis, that if you keep going half the distance from point A to point B, theoretically you never get to point B. Because let's just say that point B is 6 inches. You go 3 inches, then you go 1.5 inches, and then you go another 1/2 inch, and you continue to go half by half by half. Theoretically, you never get to the other point. When you start with the idea that we're going to start confiscating guns because somebody might commit a crime, where do you draw the line? What is the point at which you make the conclusion that, yes, a crime is imminent versus someone has the potential to commit a crime? Because I maintain that every one of us is just, I don't know, I shouldn't say every one of us, but I think a lot of people live on the edge, and almost anything can push them over, and at some point they end up committing a crime. Some sort of desperation, some sort of circumstantial problems, whatever it might be, causes somebody to go off the deep end. It can happen to anybody. So we're going to start trying to anticipate when someone's going to commit a crime, and then we're going to confiscate their guns. Now let's go back to Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke, at the age of 15, wrote an essay in which he described seeing 2 children on bicycles or walking down a street, crossing a crosswalk. And he's in his car and he fantasizes about killing those kids because they're happy and their happiness belongs to him. Was that real? How would that have been adjudicated in a court of law? What kind of evidence would have been required before we decided that, oh, this is just these are just the fantasizings and ramblings of a 15-year-old normal boy that has just fantasized about killing somebody, or do we really take it seriously? And then, of course, it raises the entire question of what sort of substantive and procedural due process do we provide that 15-year-old Robert Francis O'Rourke? Or do we just decide, look, there's prima facie evidence here because he wrote an essay as part of this cult group, and we're going to take his guns away, or we're going to put him in a mental institution because he might do something? Back to Congressman Crenshaw.
It's that simple, and this isn't that controversial. What is controversial is how that due process is protected, and I think that's where a lot of these concerns are. Making sure that due process could not be abused is at the heart of any conservative solution to the supposed red flag laws and our version of what those would look like. I have laid out specific safeguards that would have to be in place for us to support any type of red flag law. Okay, among them would be clear and convincing evidence, punishment for false accusations, right to attorney and cross-examination, and limited standing so that not just anybody can accuse you. For instance, not just a neighbor, not just an ex. It has to be somebody with standing, maybe a family member, or maybe only police officers. We've got
maybe family members, aunts, uncles, cousins. Where do you draw the line? Or only police officers? Police officers never hold grudges. Police officers never do anything wrong. Police officers are just like the rest of the general population. You have 1,000 cops, you got 10 bad ones. Family members. You have an extended family of 20 people. 1 or 2 of them might just be bat crap crazy. Yet they accuse you of being the one that is bat crap crazy. We're really reaching into dangerous territory when we start deciding that a right that says shall not be infringed can be infringed based upon all of these safeguards that Dan Crenshaw says he's going to build into the statute, which of course then will be interpreted by the courts. there'll be some horrific case where, they look at something and then they miss something and that person goes out and does indeed commit a crime. So the next time, you rein that due process in just a little bit more. Yes, indeed, it is a slippery slope, but nobody wants to admit that.
Great study by Cato Institute that lays this out exactly. Here's the thing.
By the way, I would encourage you to go to cato.org, look for that study. I agree with a lot of what Cato does. Everybody's missing the point here, and that is you're going to start at point A. You're going to have all of these safeguards built in, and over time, either legislatively or through court decisions, those safeguards are going to get whittled away.
Understand your fears about bad red flag laws. Red flag law is a general concept. There can be good ones and there can be bad ones. You should be against the bad ones, as I am. The whole purpose of what the president did and what I am doing in trying to start a conversation about this is so that we take control of the narrative and propose solutions that actually do protect due process rights and ensure that we aren't on the sidelines when Democrats are proposing blatantly unconstitutional laws that would not protect due process. The last thing is this. No one is saying this is definitely the solution. It's a conversation. I haven't come out in support of any particular bill or state law. It's a conversation that conservatives have actually been having for a very long time. It's not new at all. And
I've been a conservative my entire life. And the only conversation that I've been having is the conversation in opposition to red flag laws. There are, let's just be, you know how I feel about hate crimes. If you commit an aggravated assault or a sexual battery or murder or anything else, any crime, that is a crime in and of itself. If when you murder someone, you do it specifically because they happen to be a minority status, or you have expressed your hatred or ill will toward that individual, and so now you tack on a hate crime, what's the purpose of that? What is the purpose of that? You already have a statute in place that criminalizes all of these behaviors. Now what you're doing is you're giving prosecutors an additional tool with which to tack on additional penalties for what is already a crime and that already has substantial penalties for the commission of that crime. I'm opposed to all of these hate crime bills for that very reason, because now a jury is forced to start looking into what was the mindset of the individual. Now, they committed a murder, they committed a sexual battery, they committed an aggravated assault, whatever it might be. You find that they have met, the prosecution has proven to you as a juror beyond a reasonable doubt all of the elements of those particular crimes. Now the prosecutor is asking you to go to one step further after you have determined that the individual is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of whatever that crime might be, and now look into the mind of that individual. That's precisely what red flag laws are doing, except that there is no predicate crime. There is nothing prior to someone having to look into the mind of someone and making a determination based purely on circumstantial evidence, because the individual who is subjected to a red flag law has I'm making an assumption here that a particular individual has not committed any other crimes. They have just indicated a willingness to go commit a crime, but they've not done so. We're now going to start asking either jurors, or more likely than not, we're going to start asking judges to look into the mind of somebody and anticipate whether or not they are going to commit a crime. Crenshaw continues, or closes out pretty quickly.
It does not deserve the emotional reaction it has gotten. We are better than that. Let's be better than that.
Oh, so now I'm being criticized for having an emotional response to something that I've been arguing logically against for decades. This is what happens when you have an emotional, look, I'm not saying you shouldn't have an emotional response to the tragedy of what took place in Dayton or El Paso or the STEM High School in Highlands Ranch or anywhere else. Of course, those are tragic events, and your empathy and sympathy should go out to everybody involved. But having that kind of emotional response versus having an emotional response that says, oh my gosh, something must be done. And then what must be done is that we're now going to start anticipating whether or not individuals are going to commit crimes. If somebody's crazy, let's just get down to the bottom line. If somebody's crazy and you can, as a family member, demonstrably prove that somebody is crazy, there are already statutes, 550s, I forget, different courts have, different states have different numbers for them. But generally, if you think that someone is a danger to themselves or others, there are already statutes on the books that allow family members to go petition a court to have you committed or guardianship approved if you can prove that that individual, not that they might commit a crime, but that they might be a harm to themselves or to others. We already have statutes on the books. We had a lot of red flags. For example, with the shooter at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Nobody, after all of those indications that this kid had some sort of mental instability, nobody did anything. Nobody had him committed. Friends, family, nobody did anything. Now you put that in the realm of confiscation of guns for a crime that you might commit. I think we're having an emotional response that's completely unnecessary. Okay, I'm back. So I want to shift now, and I want to talk about the case where the kid walked in, I think he's 20 years old, where he walked into a Walmart wearing all sorts of body armor and weapons. I've had a lot of people, friends over the weekend ask me to, hey, what do you think about that? It's a situation where this guy walks into a Springfield, Missouri Walmart. He's carrying a rifle. He's wearing body armor. He's packing over 100 rounds of ammunition, at least according to all the news reports that I can read. And the man was held by gunpoint by another patron of the store who happened to be an off-duty firefighter. And he turned over the kid to the responding Springfield cops a few minutes later. The most common question I got is whether the firefighter who held the rifle-armed man at gunpoint, whether he did that lawfully, and what was that firefighter's legal justification for threatening deadly force against the rifle-armed man, given that purportedly there's no specific Missouri law against shopping at a Walmart while armed with a rifle, wearing body armor, or armed with a lot of ammo. Before we get to that, here are a few relevant factual details that, of course, you don't hear about in the media. All you hear about is a guy walks into a Walmart, heavily armed, scares everybody. The manager, turns on the alarm. People begin to evacuate, and this firefighter sees him. The firefighter, who is lawfully concealed carrying, brings him down. Doesn't shoot him, but he stops him. That man with the rifle has been identified by the Springfield, Missouri cops as 20-year-old Dmitry N. Andreychenko. So whatever Russian joke you want to make here, go ahead and insert your Russian joke. He was arrested on a first-degree charge of making terrorist threats under, and I assume the best I can determine, this is the statute, Section 574.115, making terroristic threats, first degree. It's a Class D felony in Missouri. It's good for 7 years in prison and up to a $10,000 fine. Now, naturally, conviction on this or any other felony charge is going to strip Mr. Andreychenko of his rights forever. Here's the text of what the statute says. A person commits the offense of making a terrorist threat in the first degree if such person, with the purpose of frightening 10 or more people or causing the evacuation, quarantine, or closure of any portion of a building, inhabitable structure, place of assembly, or facility of transportation knowingly causes, this is section 3 now, knowingly causes a false belief or fear that an incident has occurred or that a condition exists involving danger to life. Now, if you want to understand how the law is likely to apply in this case, I think it's important to understand that for the legal purposes, the conduct of each of the main characters involved, Androchenko on the one hand and the firefighter on the other, their actions are not dependent upon each other. They are, of course, related to each other. Presumably, the firefighter would not have taken Androchenko at gunpoint but for Androchenko's conduct in showing up in a Walmart like he did. But they are not controlling on each other. And here's what I mean. Whether the firefighter's conduct was lawful or unlawful is not a function of whether Androchenko's conduct was lawful or unlawful. It is not necessary, the way I read the statute, it is not necessary that Androchenko was committing any crime whatever in order for the firefighter taking him at gunpoint to do so lawfully. So anybody arguing that the firefighter taking Androchenko at gunpoint must have been unlawful because Androchenko was simply exercising his Second Amendment rights, I think is missing the point. The firefighter pointing a gun at Androchenko could well be perfectly lawful, even if it's true that Androchenko was committing no crime at all. Now, why? Because what determines the legality of the firefighter's threat of force is his reasonable perception of the circumstances. Here's what I mean. If the firefighter reasonably perceives that Androchenko presented an imminent threat of deadly force harmful to innocents, taking Androchenko at gunpoint to neutralize that threat would be lawful. And that's true regardless of whether Androchenko actually presented or intended to present such a threat. You see, it's dependent upon what the firefighter perceived. And let me be brutally honest, too. It doesn't matter what you or I think of the reasonableness of the firefighter's perception of Androchenko. None of us will be the ultimate deciders of the reasonableness of the firefighter's perception. And therefore, we can't be deciders of the lawfulness of the firefighter's conduct. Ultimately, the only opinion that matters is that of any prospective jury, the body to whom the prosecutor must sell a narrative of guilt, and in the interim, that of the prosecutor who is gauging how a jury is likely to perceive those facts. Now, it is likely that a jury, fully aware that days just prior to this Missouri event, a mass shooter with a rifle had walked into a Walmart in Texas and murdered a bunch of people in a mass attack, that would, I think then the jury would perceive as wildly unreasonable the firefighter's perception that Androchenko, armed with a rifle and body armor and more than 100 rounds of ammunition while walking into a Walmart in Missouri, was an imminent deadly force threat. I think any jury would say, yeah, probably so. But especially when the firefighter's perception was shared by other witnesses of Androchenko's conduct, especially when the consequences of the firefighter's action was not the death of Androchenko, but merely holding him at gunpoint for about 3 minutes until the cops arrived. So when you balance the dangers posed by holding Androchenko at gunpoint for maybe 3 minutes until the cops arrived on the one hand, and then the concern on the other that Androchenko could have been a copycat mass murderer, how do you think a jury is going to weigh on those two risks? I think any reasonable jury is going to find, yeah, considering everything else that we know and considering everything that's been in the news, the firefighter probably reacted appropriately. Now remember, it doesn't matter at all that the firefighter's perception of Androchenko was actually correct. It only matters if it was reasonable under the circumstances. Now, if I was the DA and I was thinking about charging the firefighter with having committed an unlawful threat of force against Androchenko, If I was aware of the defense argument that I just described that would be raised against any such charge, as well as the likely political perception of bringing such a charge under the circumstances, I got to tell you the decision for me would be an easy one. I'm not charging this firefighter at all. Now, in addition, the fact that Andrewchenko may have caused a reasonable perception of an imminent deadly force threat while carrying a firearm does not excuse that conduct if the conduct is otherwise unlawful. The Second Amendment is not a waiver against being held responsible for otherwise criminal conduct. Let me put that in just really raw terms. The Second Amendment is not a license. It's not a 007 license to kill. It's not even a 007 license to threat. Robbing a bank is not lawful just because the robber used a gun and was simply exercising his Second Amendment rights. I don't think anybody in their right mind would make that argument. But similarly, committing a terroristic threat is not lawful just because the person doing so is armed with a rifle and claiming to be simply exercising his Second Amendment rights. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's take guns out of the picture entirely. If a man had walked into a Texas Walmart carrying cans labeled fertilizer, diesel fuel. Anybody remember Timothy McVeigh? And he sat in the middle of the Walmart and combined the two in the middle of the floor and ignited the combination to blow up the building and kill lots of people. And then a few days later, a similarly equipped man walked into a Missouri Walmart. Do you think it would be unreasonable for observers to reasonably perceive a similar outcome? I think it would be totally reasonable for them to perceive a similar outcome. This is also why I'm opposed in almost all circumstances, not all, but in almost all circumstances, it's why I'm opposed to open carry. Now, before everybody goes ballistic, I understand you have a right to open carry. And I do believe that we are creating a culture in this country where even the presence of a gun, just seeing a gun, causes many people to panic. That bugs me. But that's the reality. But I don't open carry not because I'm afraid it's going to scare people. I don't open carry because I don't want, if I'm in downtown Denver, if I'm on the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder, if I'm in any sort of venue with a lot of people where there may be an active shooter, I don't want that active shooter to see me carrying a gun. That's true even in a Walmart. I don't open carry into a Walmart, even though I probably could. I don't do it not because I'm afraid people are going to overreact and be scared. I don't do it because if there is going to be an active shooter, I want to have time to find a defensive position, to escape if I can, and lastly, if I have an opportunity, to take out the active shooter. I don't want the active shooter to see me and say, aha, a guy with a gun, kill him first. But even in the absence of a specific Missouri law against carrying fertilizer and diesel fuel into a store, what do? I think in the absence of the second man having any actual intent to blow the second store up is a better question. Let's put it this way. The Missouri Walmart case is not a gun rights case. And if you think it is a gun rights case, I don't think you've thought it through. But what about the criminal charge of terroristic threatening brought against Andrewchenko? Is that charge reasonable under the circumstances? Do you think a district attorney, a prosecutor, could convict Andrewchenko of that Missouri statute? Now, I've heard some argue that there's no evidence that Andrewchenko intended to harm anybody, that he was simply exercising his Second Amendment rights, and that for all we know, his intent was perfectly lawful. All right, let's stop and just think about that for a second. Just for the sake of argument, I'll narrow the charge against Andrewchenko as this. With the purpose of frightening 10 or more people, he knowingly caused a false belief or fear that a condition exists involving danger to life. That's really kind of the statute in a nutshell. But how, you might ask, are we supposed to know what Androchenko's intent was, absent him confessing to that intent? After all, we don't have a brain scanning machine. He didn't actually shoot up anybody. We don't have this machine that can tell us his intent walking into a Walmart carrying a rifle, wearing body armor, and carrying 100 rounds of ammunition. Doesn't that mean there's reasonable doubt that he intended to commit the crime of terroristic threatening? Not necessarily so. It's true. We don't have that brain scanning machine to apply to Androchenko. But it's also true that we've never had a brain scanning machine to apply to any criminal defendant. And yet people get convicted all the time based on their criminal intent. So how do we determine criminal intent without this magic machine, at least in the absence of a confession of intent? Well, what we do is we make reasonable inferences from the conduct and all of the circumstances. And ultimately, of course, in most cases a jury, sometimes a judge, but most likely a jury, the jury has to make that reasonable inference. The jury has to make that decision. Is it reasonable to infer what his intent was? So then, was Androchenko's intent in carrying a rifle, wearing body armor, having 100 rounds of ammunition on his person, to go shopping at Walmart? I think that seems unlikely, given that millions upon millions of people shop at Walmart without the feeling to need to bring a rifle, body armor, and ammunition. And also with, I bet right now, you could walk into any Walmart, and if we had, again, some magic scanning device where we could, the magic x-ray glasses like you used to see in the back of magazines when you were a teenager or you're a Boy Scout, and you could send in your cereal box top and $2 and you get the magic x-ray glasses. If we had those magic x-ray glasses, and I bet we walked into almost any Walmart, we would be absolutely surprised at how many people are concealed carrying in any given Walmart at any given time. So, was Androchenko's intent in carrying a rifle, wearing body armor, having 100 rounds of ammunition on his person, was his intent to exercise his Second Amendment rights? I don't think so. There are over 100 million gun owners in America, including Second Amendment absolutists like me, who believe all preemptive gun laws apply to law-abiding, mentally sound American citizens to be facially unconstitutional, and who exercise our Second Amendment rights every single day. And yet I have never felt the need to carry a rifle or to open carry into a Walmart while wearing body armor. But I can hear people arguing. But carrying a rifle into Walmart while wearing body armor may be unusual, but that doesn't make it illegal. So I would suggest it does make it illegal if the conduct of walking into a Walmart wearing body armor, carrying a rifle, and 100 rounds of ammo, I believe that if that conduct, or that conduct would be considered threatening, if that conduct is reasonably foreseeable, and let's go to the statute, to cause a fear that a condition exists involving danger to life. The fear condition being that a copycat rifle-armed mass murderer in a Walmart just a couple of days after that event actually occurred. That's why Missouri, in particular, created a law against terroristic threats. I'm a Second Amendment purist absolutist. I've never felt the need, and I've never frankly thought that it would be exercising my Second Amendment rights to do what this goober did days after a real goober walked into a Walmart, similarly dressed, and killed a bunch of people. If there does not appear to be a reasonable basis for gearing up with a rifle, body armor, and ammunition, it shouldn't be surprising if observers perceive that there may be an unreasonable basis for doing so, and in fact, an unlawful basis, a life-threatening basis. And that's especially the case if a mass shooting under similar circumstances, a mass shooting that caused a great loss of life, had just occurred. So I would say to all my Second Amendment absolutist friends that legitimately ask me the question about it, I think that, sure, if you want to claim that walking into a Walmart with a long gun, body armor, carrying 100 rounds of ammo, days after somebody else had done the same thing and actually killed people, that's you exercising your Second Amendment rights, okay. But just remember, there are other laws as subsets of the Second Amendment that say if you create a terroristic threat, if you intend, which is what the jury's going to have to weigh. The jury's going to have to weigh that if you decide you want to do this based on your Second Amendment rights, but if a jury decides, yeah, you can claim that, but based on the circumstances and based on the evidence that we hear and see and are told at trial, think you did it for a terroristic reason, do you want to run that risk? I don't, and I won't. I'll be right back. So I'm back. Epstein. The Clintons did it. No, Trump did it. Oh, somebody paid the guards off. The guards turned their back while other prisoners came in and killed him. The Attorney General of the United States has, here. Let me back up a second. Maybe the best thing about the death, the demise. Let's just call it the demise. And I'm sure that will cause conspiracy theorists to go ballistic. I'm not going to call it a suicide. I'm not going to call it a murder. I'm just going to say Jeffrey Epstein's demise. I think the best thing about that story is it's too lurid to escape widespread attention. It's too fishy not to erode public gullibility regarding the trustworthiness of big government and big media. Conspiracy theories are blossoming on the right and on the left. And no matter how absurd, they all contain one grain of truth, and that's this. The authorities are not likely to tell us the whole truth and nothing but the truth about how he escaped justice for so long, and the authorities are not likely to tell us the whole truth and nothing but the truth about why he is now dead. If people reject the establishment narrative regarding Jeffrey Epstein, who is to say they will continue to believe the establishment narrative regarding, say, global warming, or white supremacy, or the wisdom of open borders? See, I think it's the lesson of there's always something good coming out of things. I think there's also a healthy dose of skepticism. And I think it's become, the skepticism, a long-held American tradition, is now almost institutionalized. When I heard of Jeffrey Epstein's death on Saturday, of course I log on and I start reading all the stories that I can. And I'm on Twitter and I'm on looking at the Wall Street Journal and Drudge and New York Post and Washington Post, New York. I'm looking everywhere I can to find everything I can about Epstein. And I ran across the Attorney General of the United States and his statement about he is appalled about the death of Jeffrey Epstein while in federal custody. But then this next thing the Attorney General said sealed my skepticism, not about Jeffrey Epstein, but about government. Because you know what the Attorney General of the United States has done? And I think most media outlets have glossed over this. Of course, he has told the FBI to investigate and find out the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, why, about Jeffrey Epstein's death. But in the very next sentence, he said, and I'm also tasking the Inspector General of the Department of Justice to also investigate the 5 W's of Jeffrey Epstein's death. And I leaned back and I thought, wow, this is where we are today. The Attorney General of the United States, who may or may not, I can't read his mind, may or may not have trust in the credibility or the ability of the Federal Bureau of Investigation based upon what he's learning about other FBI matters. But the fact that he's also tasked the Inspector General to conduct a parallel ongoing investigation tells me that, Michael, what would you do in those circumstances? If you didn't trust entirely the FBI to tell you everything about Jeffrey Epstein's death, and you were the Attorney General, what would you do? Oh, I'd turn over here to the Inspector General, who's been doing a parallel investigation for me about the origins of the Russia investigation, because I can't necessarily trust the FBI. I'll have them investigate this too. American skepticism, this broad tradition we have in America, also resides in the brain and in the mind of the Attorney General, Bill Barr. And for that, I'm both saddened and grateful. I'll be right back. Going in a completely different direction for a minute. The magazine Nature is reporting that the United Nations is, well, they're coming for your food on behalf of climate. Nation, that was a Freudian slip. Nature magazine reports efforts to curb greenhouse gas emissions and the impacts of global warming will fail significantly short without drastic changes in global land use, agriculture, and human diets, leading researchers to warn in a high-level report commissioned by the United Nations. Now, too bad there's not actual science involved. They might proceed more methodically, first proving that there is any warming beyond normal fluctuation, then proving that more bad than good will come of this. I've always been kind of fascinated. I mean, I would much rather the world get a little warmer and extend growing seasons and allow us to produce even more food than for the world to get a whole lot colder, which of course then we have to figure out ways to keep ourselves warmer. Little global warming, I'm not convinced is going to be that bad. But anyway, back to the fact I don't think actual science is involved in the Nature magazine story. You know, they might proceed more methodically, first proving that there is any warming beyond normal fluctuation, and then maybe proving that more bad than good will come of this, then proving that human greenhouse gas emissions are causing the warming, and then proving that dictating what we can eat would have any perceptible impact on the weather. But of course, you don't need to do any of that because this is a power grab. This isn't science. Nature continues in its story. On August 8th, the IPC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released a summary of the report, which is designed to inform upcoming climate negotiations amidst the worsening global climate crisis. More than 100 experts, I use the term loosely, but it's in the story. More than 100 experts compiled the report in recent months, around half of whom hail from developing countries. I don't think it's a coincidence that so many of these experts come from developing, or as you might refer to them as S-hole countries, despite such countries being a poor place to look for scientific expertise. I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but if I'm looking for really great advances in technology, science, medicine, law, anything, I really don't look at S-hole countries. The redistribution of wealth from nations that create it to nations that do not create that wealth, that is a major component of global warming ideology. So these religious fanatics about climate change have their marching orders. Nature magazine says, it's really exciting that the IPCC is getting such a strong message across says Ruth Richardson, the Toronto, Canada-based executive director at the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, a strategic coalition of philanthropic foundations. She says, quote, "We need a radical transformation, not incremental shifts, towards a global land use and food system that serves our client needs." A radical transformation? If you go back and you read Mao's or study Mao's Great Leap Forward, the objectives of which were pretty modest. Now, granted, it killed 45 million people in just 4 years, but think of all the carbon footprints that were wiped clean with the death of 45 million people. And think about, well, you don't have 45 million mouths to feed either. And it isn't just meat that these anti-human maniacs scream makes it be too hot out. They don't like crops either. It might be okay with the climate if we just eat maggots, though. Remember, we've had stories about eating maggots, bugs, crickets, roaches, all sorts of stuff. So how did Stalin and Mao manage to kill so many more people than Hitler? They took control of the food supply, and then starvation took care of the rest. So why do we continue to talk about climate change when we know that it's all about power and controlling the population? Well, Al Gore's back in the news. He's on ABC this week talking about his prediction that the climate point of no return would hit in 2016. That was 3 years ago.
You said back in 2006 that the world would reach the point of no return if drastic measures weren't taken to reduce greenhouse gases by 2016. So here we are. Is it already too late?
Well, some changes, unfortunately, have already been locked in place. Sea level increases are going to continue no matter what we do now. But we can prevent much larger sea level increases, much more rapid increases in temperatures. The heat wave was in Europe. Now it's in the Arctic, and we're seeing huge melting of the ice there. So the warnings of the scientists 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, unfortunately were accurate. Here's the good news, Jonathan. In the Democratic contest for the presidential nomination this year, virtually all of the candidates are agreed that this is either the top issue or one of the top two issues.
Are you satisfied with the way they're talking about climate change?
But I would always like to see more time devoted to it, but I have to say, yes, I think that it's great.
I didn't see this. I just saw it in my clipping service. But the fantastic part about this whole interview is not the stupidity of pointing out that, well, yes, when I said that 2016 was the point of no return is accurate, and of course we're all still here and nothing's really changed, is what you're not able to see listening to that soundbite is that Sunday morning on ABC this week, as Jonathan Karl was interviewing Al Gore, and Al Gore was describing all of those things about rising sea levels and the heat wave, and there was a heat wave in Paris in the summer. Imagine that. There was a heat wave in Colorado in the summer. Imagine that. There's usually heat waves in the summer, and there's usually cold waves in the winter. I don't know how that works, but it does. But anyway, what you didn't see was ABC News, which is the owner of ABC This Week, which airs on Sunday mornings. As Al Gore was describing all of those falsities, they were showing floods, the heat wave in Paris, crumbling glaciers, rivers of water. I don't know what that was supposed to be. I guess the Arctic melting or something. They were showing all of those visuals as Al Gore talked. Pure, unadulterated propaganda. It was hilarious. You may remember that on Friday, Christian and I talked about Universal Studios' The Hunt. This is the story where the deplorables are the good guys that are being hunted by bad guys because hunting humans is now sport. And I pointed out, I think probably Christian did too, is that we both, I can't speak for Christian about the Second Amendment, but just as I'm a Second Amendment absolutist, I'm also a First Amendment absolutist. And I did not want to see this movie canceled banned, boycotted, or anything. In fact, as Christian and I both expressed, we were kind of bewildered that why would you complain about this movie when the deplorables are the good guys being hunted by the bad guys, which apparently, would be those on the left, Antifa and the others. Well, it turns out it's been canceled. And Universal says that they've canceled the film because they think they think the timing's bad. But I also think it was because of the conservative backlash. I sometimes wish conservatives would not take on the tactics of the left and instead recognize that it might actually be good for our cause for Universal Studios to release a movie that shows all of us who are considered deplorables being hunted by those that disagree with us politically. It might just be that tipping point. It might be that final nail in the coffin that shows, Hollywood's gone too far. But nonetheless, Universal Studios has canceled it. I don't know whether it'll be brought out at some time in the future or just relegated to on demand or what. But yeah, it's been canceled. And I think shame on us as conservatives for bitching about it too much. I wish it had come out. If you've liked the content of the Michael Brown Unplugged episodes, then when you download it, wherever you download it, if you could, for example, some of you download on Spreaker or you listen on Spreaker, if you could follow me on Spreaker or if you could like it on Spreaker, if you could share it through the Spreaker app or website, that would be great. If you download on iTunes, for example, if you could leave a 5-star rating and give us a positive review, that would be fantastic. If you listen to us on the iHeart app, if you could follow us there and if you could share it through the iHeart app with other people, that would be fantastic too. And then the final thing I would ask, which I normally do, is if you would follow me on all of the social media platforms. We distribute the podcast on YouTube. You can find it on Twitter and Facebook and other places. And the best way to follow me on all of the social media platforms is simply to go to the website, michaelbrowntoday.com. michaelbrowntoday.com. And all the icons are across the bottom on the homepage. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on Facebook. And as a reminder, if you like the Facebook page, you have to do that before you can join the discussion group. But if you like the Facebook page, there's also an internal Michael Brown Unplugged discussion group, which you can request to join. And if you're not some troll, we'll put you in there, and it's a place where you can actually post things, you can post articles, you can ask me questions, you can do all sorts of things. But you have to like the Michael Brown show page on Facebook, all of which you can find at michaelbrowntoday.com. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you Tuesday.